Thank you so much for joining us today on Solutions for Mental Wellness. I want to turn our attention to teens. The adolescent years, the teen years, are often wrought with a lot of emotion dysregulation, behavioral challenges, and these things can be normal, but they can also grow to something that is challenging for the teen, parents, educators, all alike. So talk to us a little bit about teenagers today.
It's a difficult time for teenagers.
Yes.
They're faced with so many things in the schools, social media, and it's just a very difficult time. For girls, it seems to hit around age 13 that some of these issues begin to arise, and their hormones are changing. They're beginning to care about their appearance and different things like that. For boys, it's usually around 14 that it tends to happen. Teens today, some of the biggest problems that they have, depression is actually number one.
Yes.
With teenagers.
That does not surprise me.
Anxiety is a close second. Many do have ADHD. Many have oppositional defiant disorder. Eating disorders are huge, particularly among girls, but it can also be in boys.
Yes.
Often people think that boys can't have an eating disorder, but they certainly can.
I have seen a lot of eating disordered behaviors since the pandemic.
Yes. And then even some serious mental illnesses such as schizophrenia
Yes.
can begin to happen in those teenage years. It's very rare in children, but it sometimes will start to become apparent in the teenage years. And then substance abuse.
Yes.
Substance abuse is high. I have another story. I have a lot of stories because I've been doing this for a long time. I had a second grade boy who revealed to me that he was already smoking.
Yes.
He was getting them at home, of course, stealing them out of parents. By fifth grade, this young man who was in the gifted program told me that he was smoking a pack a day.
Wow.
Fifth grade. By middle school, he had progressed to marijuana.
Yes.
And then by high school, he had progressed to the hard drugs, using crack and even heroin. He came back to see me when he was 23 years old, and he said, "I fried my brain. I can't think. I tried to go back to school, and I just can't function." And it was just so sad to see how this progressed. He had a lot of trauma in his life, a divorce, many other things that led to this trauma. But to see that progression it just hurt my heart to see that. So just some statistics, and this comes from the CDC. Of course, depression, substance use, and suicide are very important concerns that we have to have for teenagers. 15% of teenagers self-reported that they had had a major depressive episode.
Wow, that's significant.
Yes. 36% reported that they had persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. We know that hopelessness is one of the biggest factors in suicide.
Yes.
4% had a substance abuse disorder, and then 2% had an alcohol use disorder. 18% had seriously considered suicide. 15% had made a plan. And then 8.9% had actually had an attempt.
Wow.
So these are very serious concerns for our young people. And one thing that I have found is that often if that child says to the parent, "I just want to kill myself," the parents don't believe it. They think that they just want attention.
Yes.
We've actually had to call parents before from the school and say your child is making suicidal statements and you need to come pick them up and take them to the emergency room, and have had parents refuse to come and say they just want attention. And then when we say, well, we'll have to call 911 to take them, then usually they'll come, but then they're angry about it. So once again, these children need to be believed.
Yes.
That there's something going on within them that's making them make these statements.
Yes. And even if it is attention seeking, there's a reason, and they may not know the words or the language to put to what's going on within them. And so it is like a flare gun that they are firing and saying, hey, things aren't well here. And so by meeting that with gentleness, with care and concern, one of the things that parents are doing when they come in and they meet with that, they're just attention seeking, then they are communicating to their child that their child's needs do not matter and that their child is a problem for them. And that is very destructive for the children, or whether it's under the age of 12 or an adolescent. It's just incredibly destructive.
True. And of course, there are so many other things that young people are facing today. School is very different than it was when I was growing up. I have been in schools recently, in the high schools, because of attending IEP meetings for those that might have an individual education plan. And I see kids making out in the hallways, dressed inappropriately, so many things like that that would not have been allowed even just recently. It seems that the schools have become much more lax in that. Children today are struggling with gender identity.
Yes.
There are many, many struggles that teenagers are facing right now.
So it's not only the natural hormonal and chemical struggles that our teens are facing, and just learning how to regulate their emotions as their brain and their bodies develop, but their social and cultural changes that our teens are faced today. And it sounds like that there's a lot of just overall confusion in life and upheaval. And one of the primary tasks for adolescents is to figure out who they are and where they fit in society. Can you speak to that at all?
Yes, I think that one thing that we need to do is be good listeners to what the child is saying as they are trying to find out who they are and what they want to do. We have to be good listeners. I think about some of those that I think I mentioned earlier of you're not college material, but yet that child is thinking, I want to go to college. I want to be able to do this.
Yes.
And so we don't want to say things that's going to discourage them from those things. We need to listen, and then we need to find ways to encourage them. We can talk to them about, wow, you really want to do that. Here's what you're going to have to do. I'm going to give you an example of one of the 14 grandchildren who said, Grammy, I want to be a therapist like you.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And I'm like, okay, so Seth, let's think about that. Let's understand that you've got to go for 4 years, and then you have to go and get at least a master's degree. And so are you willing to do that much school? And his answer to me was, well, Grammy, everybody comes to me and tells me their problems because they know I listen.
Wow, you've trained your grandchildren well.
And so, I don't want to discourage him, and that's what he wants to do, but I want to let him know, here's what you have to do to be able to reach that goal.
Yes.
But we don't want to take their thoughts away. Another granddaughter wants to be a writer. We know how difficult that might be.
Yes.
But yet, she's a wonderful writer. And I think she has that possibility of success. So we talk about it. What would you want to write about? What kind of author would you want to be?
Yes.
So I think that can be really important. When we think about some of the different issues that kids have today, I think that some of them, such as ADHD and disruptive behavioral disorders, we really need to work with the parents. Parent training and learning some behavior management is one of the best things that we can do to help those children and to help those families. Child behavior therapy, such as play therapy
Yes.
or cognitive behavioral play, works well for those kids with ADHD. It can work well for the disruptive behavioral disorders also. And many people think that that's not true. But I personally believe that Jesus was the first CBT therapist.
Yes, I agree. I agree.
So I think that therapy works very well for children and for adults. It can also work very well for depression and anxiety in children.
So, Cathy, when we are thinking about teens, just like with children, parents have to be involved in the process. And so, with teens, what are some things that parents can do to help their teens through this naturally challenging time?
So parent training and learning some skills in behavior management can be very, very helpful, particularly in things such as ADHD and some of the disruptive behavioral disorders. Parents need to learn ways to deal with those teenagers. We know that teenagers will act out for different reasons, and one of them is attention. Another one is power. They want power and control.
Yes.
Another one is revenge,
Yes.
that they're angry about something and they want to get back at that parent. And then another one is feelings of inadequacy, that they feel like I can't do anything right. And so if we train the parents in ways that they can respond to these different things that are happening with their child, it can make a big difference in working with them. We know that cognitive behavioral therapy works well for teenagers as well as it does for adults. It works very well for the behavioral disorders, but it also works well for depression and anxiety because they are learning ways to change their thinking so that they are thinking doing away with those negative thoughts that they have or those unhelpful thoughts that they have and learn ways to change them into more helpful thinking. So those are both ways that the parents can be involved and that the therapists can help.
Do educators also play as an important role in teenagers' lives?
Yes, they do. It's interesting because we know that when teenagers go to school, they usually have either 4 or 6 teachers a day.
Yes.
And so there is not that relationship that the young children have. The elementary school teachers are usually very nurturing, and the high school teachers only have them for a short time. So it's difficult to really make that strong relationship. But finding out things about the kids that are in your classroom, even as a college professor, I usually start my classes by saying, tell me something about you that no one else knows, and just making those connections there so that I can respond to them in a positive way. I think that teenagers need a lot of encouragement because it is a difficult time. It's a difficult time in our world.
Yes.
And it's a tough time to be a teen. So they need a lot of encouragement. They need to be told what they're doing right because often all they hear is what they're doing wrong.
Yes.
And they really need to, like, wow, you made an 83 on your midterm. I am so proud of you. You really worked hard.
Yes.
Something like that can make such a difference for a child.
Yes. You mentioned something when I was at Converse in my graduate program there. You gave the example about talking to the teen, and I think it may have been one of your grandchildren who had brought their report card in, and they showed you the lowest score that they had had, and you highlighted the there was only one low grade. All the others were very high grades, and so if a child naturally goes to, well, I'm failing in this regard, what can parents do that is going to the teen is going to feel like the parent isn't just being a parent and saying, oh, you are smart. But what is something genuine that a parent can do when their child comes to them and say, hey, I've messed up in this area, or I didn't perform in this area, or I know this isn't what you wanted and I've failed? What can a parent do?
All right. So thank you for remembering something I taught you so many years ago and that example that I used. What we have found is that most of the time when kids bring their report card home, the parents' eyes go first to the lowest grade, and that's what they focused on. Wow, you made a C in history. And they don't even look at the A's and B's that the child made in the other subjects. And so the best way to handle this is by saying, wow, you had an A in English and you had a B in math and you had another B in science. You've really been working hard in those subjects. I noticed that you only had a C in history. I'm wondering what I can do to help you with that. Could I help you study? What would be helpful to you? And so not pointing out the negative first is the biggest thing. Pointing out what the child is doing well first, so the child knows that you're recognizing that. Yeah. As I mentioned, too many teens are being told what they're doing wrong and not what they're doing right.
So it sounds like when we focus on the things that they have done well, what they have performed well with, and then we ask them, so what do you think about that grade? How do you feel about that grade? Then we are creating space for them to have their own individual thoughts about it, and that their thoughts about it can be different than ours.
Yes.
Or maybe their thoughts about it is they thought, well, I guess I'll never get into college with this grade. And we can balance that and say, it sounds like you're really disappointed in your grade. I want you to know, I know how hard that class is, and I think you're doing your best. How can I help that? It goes back to the basics of voice, spending.
Good voice. Face, good voice, good words.
Yes. And those things matter even in the teen years. So, Cathy, if there was one thing you wanted our viewers and listeners to hear today about adolescence, what is one thing that you can leave them with?
I think that the one thing would be that they need to continue to have a relationship with their child, that the child feels that they can talk to them about anything.
Yes.
So if that child is struggling, whether it's with peer relationships, whether it's with a breakup, whether it's with a difficult subject or a difficult teacher, that they know that they can talk to that parent and that the parent is going to listen to them, that the parent's going to believe them, and the parent is going to try to understand. One of the worst things that we can say to a teenager, to a child, or even to our spouse is you shouldn't feel that way, because we have a right to our feelings.
Wow.
And they need to know that they have a right to their feelings and that we understand that.
Wow. A good word, Cathy. Thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to having you back on the show again.
Thank you.
Tell me a little bit about what you mean by transgenerational trauma.
So, as transgenerational trauma is the passing of trauma throughout generations, and it can also be referred to as intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma is between passing of parent and child, so a caregiver and child. But then transgenerational trauma can go back further generations. So trans means across generations. Inter is probably more
like between?
Between, yes.
Okay. So it sounds like the things that my grandparents struggled with is going to have an effect on my parents, which means it's going to affect me, which means that could potentially have an effect on the relationship I have with my parents. Am I understanding that correctly?
Relationship you have on your parents, and then how it gets passed to, if you have children, your children, and mainly how you interact and engage with the world or people and environments too.